The night I watched 12 millionaires and 1 billionaire laugh at me for carrying a tray of champagne was the same night I pressed one button and froze every bank account in that room. I still remember the silence that came after. It was the kind of silence so heavy you could hear people breathing. 1 second they were mocking me, treating me like I was invisible, like I was just another waitress in a black uniform and cheap heels. The next second, their phones started buzzing, their smiles disappeared, and the man hosting the entire party looked at me like he had just seen a ghost. So tell me honestly, if you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Would you have let them humiliate you and walk away? Or would you have reminded them exactly who they were laughing at? Because here's the truth they didn't know. I wasn't just the waitress serving drinks at that mansion. I was the woman who built the financial security system, protecting half of their fortunes. I was the silent partner nobody noticed. I was the person whose signature quietly sat behind empires they thought they owned alone. And that night, after years of being underestimated, disrespected, and discarded, I finally decided I was done being invisible. My name is Elena Carter, and for most of my life, I learned that power doesn't always wear expensive suits or arrive in luxury cars. Sometimes it wears an apron, carries dirty plates, and listens quietly while everyone else tells you exactly who they think you are. I grew up with my mother in a tiny apartment over a laundromat on the edge of Chicago. My father left before I was old enough to remember his face. My mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and serving tables at night. I practically grew up in restaurants, sitting in back kitchens doing homework, while cooks yelled in Spanish, and dishes clattered around me. I watched wealthy people snap their fingers at my mother like she was a machine instead of a human being. I watched her smile anyway, because rent was due, and dignity didn't pay bills. She used to tell me, never let people decide your value based on where they meet you. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I do now. I was good with numbers from the beginning. Numbers made sense to me in a way people didn't. People lied. Numbers didn't. I earned scholarships, studied finance, computer systems, and eventually specialized in security architecture for private wealth management. It sounds boring when I say it like that, but what it really meant was this. I built systems that kept rich people from losing richer amounts of money. I became very good at it. By 32, I had founded a private consulting firm that worked almost entirely behind non-disclosure agreements. My clients were CEOs, politicians, family offices, and people whose names never appeared in public, but whose money moved governments. I preferred it that way. Quiet work, quiet success. And then there was Victor Langston. Victor was the kind of billionaire people write magazine covers about. Old money turned into new money. Real estate, private equity, hospitality, influence. It seemed like every expensive building downtown somehow had his fingerprints on it. He was charming in public, ruthless in private, and somehow made both look elegant. I met Victor through one of his financial attorneys. His companies had suffered a serious internal fraud issue. Millions quietly siphoned through shell accounts by someone close to him. He needed discretion, and I specialized in discretion. I solved it in 6 weeks. I found the leak, documented everything, protected the assets, and saved him from what could have been a very public scandal. He called me personally, after. "You're impressive, Elena," he said. "People like you should be impossible to find." I remember laughing. "That's why you pay me so much." He laughed too, but there was something else in it. Respect, maybe curiosity. Over the next 3 years, my firm handled security structures for several of his private entities, not his public companies, the hidden architecture underneath them. Trusts, asset shields, international protections, quiet wealth, real wealth. And somewhere in that professional relationship, Victor started inviting me to events. At first, I always said no. I hated those rooms. I hated the performance of wealth. I hated how people measured each other in watches and surnames. But Victor was persistent. "Come to one dinner," he said once. "Just one. Stop hiding behind your work." I went. It was awful. Everyone asked what school I attended, which translated to, "How much should I respect you?" Women smiled while judging your shoes. Men pretended not to be sizing up your usefulness. I left early and promised myself never again. But Victor had a daughter, Sophie. Sophie was 21, brilliant and absolutely uninterested in pretending to be impressed by anyone. She studied economics and hated most of her father's friends. Somehow, we became close. She said I was the only person around her father who talked to her like she was a person instead of a future marriage alliance. One afternoon over coffee, she told me, "You know my father trusts you more than almost anyone." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Your father trusts spreadsheets. Let's not exaggerate." She smiled. "No, he trusts you." Maybe she was right. Then came the gala. Victor hosted one enormous charity gala every year at his estate. Politicians, investors, celebrities, executives, people who donated just enough to feel noble without becoming inconvenienced. It was the event everyone wanted to attend. That year, 3 days before the gala, the catering company collapsed. Apparently the owner disappeared after a tax investigation, and half the staff vanished with him. Victor called me at midnight. "Elena, I need a favor." "That sentence never ends well," he sighed. "Sophie insisted I ask you. She says you know how to run chaos." "I'm not catering your billionaire circus. You used to work restaurants. That was 15 years ago. Please." I should have said no, but Sophie called right after, practically begging, and somehow I found myself agreeing to help coordinate service staff for one night. Just one night. Temporary disaster management. I told myself it was practical, efficient, professional. I did not realize it would become personal. The night of the gala, the mansion looked like a movie set. Crystal chandeliers, imported roses, string quartet by the fountain, valet lines stretching down the road. Everyone glittered. Everyone performed, and there I was, in a black server uniform because one staff member quit an hour before arrival, and somebody had to cover the floor. Honestly, I didn't care. Work was work at first, then the guests started arriving. I knew many of them by name because I protected parts of their fortunes, but they didn't know me. Or rather, they only knew Elena Carter in conference calls and legal documents, never imagining she might also be the woman refilling their wine. That anonymity can be educational. I watched one hedge fund manager lecture me about working harder if I wanted a better life. I watched a woman wearing diamonds worth more than my childhood apartment complain that the champagne wasn't cold enough. I smiled. I nodded. I survived. Then came Daniel Mercer. Daniel was one of Victor's closest investors and one of the most arrogant men I had ever met. Mid-40s, expensive smile, the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. He had met me once before in a boardroom, though apparently he hadn't recognized me without a tailored suit and presentation screen. He snapped his fingers at me, actually snapped. "Sweetheart, another drink." I walked over, slowly, and poured. He looked me up and down like I was furniture. "You know, with your face, you could probably marry rich instead of carrying trays." His table laughed. I smiled politely. "And miss all this excitement?" More laughter. Then a woman beside him, Vanessa, some luxury brand heiress, leaned forward and said loudly, "Imagine if staff started thinking they were equal to guests. Civilization would collapse." Everyone laughed again. I should tell you something important here. Humiliation feels strangely physical. Like heat under your skin. Like your body is trying to leave before your mind catches up. I wanted to walk away. I should have walked away. But then Daniel said, "Victor really needs to raise his standards. His waitresses are getting opinions." And Victor, who had just approached the table and heard enough to understand exactly what was happening, stopped cold. He looked at me. I looked back, and in that second, I think he realized two things. First, that his guests were humiliating someone he valued. Second, that I had reached the absolute end of my patience. Sophie appeared beside him, looking furious. But before either of them could speak, Daniel laughed and raised his glass. "To the help. May they always know their place." That was the moment. That was the exact moment I decided I was finished. So let me ask you, what would you have done? Would you have swallowed it for the sake of peace? Would you have smiled and let people like that keep believing they were untouchable? Because I stood there holding a silver tray, surrounded by people who thought money made them powerful, and I had a choice. I could stay silent, Or I could remind them that sometimes the person pouring your wine is also the person protecting your empire. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to think about that and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? I set the tray down, very carefully. Then I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my phone. Daniel smirked. What is this? Are you calling your manager? I looked him straight in the eye. No, I said. I'm calling yours. He frowned. I opened a secure app, one only a handful of people in the world even knew existed. It was tied to the financial emergency protocols my firm managed for ultra-high net worth clients. Fraud response, security lockdowns, asset freezes pending authorization review. Daniel's smile started to fade. Victor didn't say a word. He just watched. I selected a master review protocol connected to the accounts of every primary client in that room, Daniel included, since the gala involved an active fraud investigations I had quietly been handling for Victor, involving internal laundering through guest-connected entities. I had legal authority to trigger temporary compliance, holds pending verification. In simple terms, I could pause the machine, and I did. One tap, that was it. Phones buzzed almost instantly. Daniel checked his first. His face changed color. Vanessa grabbed hers next. What the hell? Another guest stood up. My transfer was declined. My accounts are locked. This says temporary compliance restriction. People started talking over each other. Panic spread fast among people used to control. Daniel stared at me. What did you do? I picked up my water glass, took one slow sip and said, I raised the standards. Silence. Victor finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. Let me clarify for everyone. Miss Carter is not waitstaff. She is the reason several of you still have the fortunes you're currently unable to access. No one moved. I have never seen arrogance collapse so quickly. Vanessa looked like she might faint. Daniel tried to recover. This is ridiculous. You can't just... I can, I said. And I did. Because while you were busy deciding my worth based on a uniform, I was reviewing suspicious financial patterns tied to 3 of your offshore structures. Would you like me to continue that conversation here? Or would you prefer privacy? He shut up. Immediately, Sophie, bless her, tried not to smile and failed completely. One older investor actually whispered, "Oh my God." Victor folded his hands behind his back. Tonight was supposed to be about charity. Perhaps humility can be included at no extra cost. Nobody laughed. Daniel pulled me aside 10 minutes later, suddenly polite in a way that almost felt insulting. Elena, he said, like we were old friends. This was clearly a misunderstanding. No, I said. It was a very clear understanding. I apologize if, interesting word choice. He swallowed. I apologize. There it was, small, forced, late, and honestly, it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Because apologies given only after consequences aren't really apologies. They're negotiations. I looked at him and thought about my mother carrying plates for people just like him. I thought about every woman dismissed because she looked too young, too poor, too quiet, too ordinary. I said, you didn't insult me because you thought I was powerless. You insulted me because you believed power made it acceptable. That's the problem. He had nothing to say. The holds remained overnight, legally temporary, socially unforgettable. By morning, half the city's private circles knew the story. Depending on who told it, I was either a legend or a dangerous woman. I was comfortable with both. Victor called me the next day. Was that necessary? He asked. Yes. A pause, then he laughed. Really laughed. I thought so too. Sophie sent me flowers with a note that read, "Finally, someone said it." But the real moment that stayed with me happened 2 days later. I visited my mother. She still worked less now, but she refused to fully retire because apparently peace and quiet annoyed her. We sat in her kitchen drinking tea while I told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she just smiled softly. You remembered. Remembered what? What I told you. Never let people decide your value based on where they meet you. I started crying right there at the kitchen table like a child. Not because of the gala. Not because of Daniel. But because for the first time, I realized I had stopped trying to prove I belonged in rooms like that. I belonged because I built the room. There's a difference. A month later, Victor made a major announcement. He restructured several of his private foundations and asked me to join the executive board. Not as a consultant, but as an equal decision-maker. I accepted, on one condition. Every scholarship program under the foundation would include grants for hospitality workers and single parents returning to school. He agreed, because if power means anything, it should open doors, not close them. As for Daniel, our professional relationship ended, quietly, permanently. Funny how quickly respect appears when access disappears. And me? I still keep that black server apron seriously. It hangs in my office closet, not as revenge, as a reminder. Because the truth is, dignity should never depend on your title. Respect should not be reserved for people with private jets. And the person you dismiss today might be the person holding your future tomorrow. People ask me sometimes if I regret freezing those accounts. Not for a second. I regret that it took that much for them to see me. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never confuse appearance with importance. Never assume the quiet person in the corner has no power. And never, ever underestimate someone who has spent their whole life learning how systems really work. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives carrying a tray of champagne. And sometimes it presses one button. So tell me, was I wrong? Would you have done the same thing? Like this video if you were on my side, and subscribe for more stories like this, because trust me, people with too much money create some unbelievable stories. And I want to hear your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I read more of them than you'd think. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust your instincts, and I'll see you all in the next story.